Casey Miller from the BCI, and we've got a number of BCI agents here on the back wall, and I want to thank them publicly for the work across the last week in conjunction with so many others in law enforcement. And there's going to be a lot of that sort of talk in the days ahead, every bit of it very justified. We should begin this morning where we should always begin, in prayerful thanks, even at a time like this. Prayerful thanks with humble grace, and thanks for the peacekeepers, many of whom are here today, all of whom should know that they are remembered here today. We are this morning reconvening, the communication this week in the wake of last week's horrible Friday afternoon events. We were in here this week on Wednesday to talk about the heroic efforts, the life-saving efforts of police officer Zach Robinson. In the face of a savage attack, we concluded and announced that his actions were reasonable, his actions were justified, his actions were in all ways lawful. To which we would add courageous, to which we would add selfless. We want to caution you as we get started here today that this remains an active investigation. What we're doing today is a little out of the ordinary in that we're talking about this matter before the conclusion of that investigation. But for a variety of reasons, it's important that we do so, and I want to thank all the law enforcement leaders who are up here today. Not all of whom will talk today, but we're all available for your questions. Please keep in mind also that this is the best information that we have as of today. I know things today that a couple of days ago looked a little murkier. We're going to answer the questions that we can answer. We're going to answer questions that we can responsibly answer. So that'll begin. There's going to be some photos up on the screen from time to time. I can tell you there will be nothing that will be ghoulish or along those lines. But we want to convey the best information that we can. These times remain, just take them for their the best approximations that we have. Sometimes because things are time-stamped, what have you. But it's the best information that we have. It's almost hard to believe that my first line looking down here, that such events can transpire in the wake of a fender bender. A fender bender in Fargo, North Dakota. 2:42 p.m., there's a two-vehicle fender bender on 25th Street South. The vehicles were proceeding south. They were just north of 9th Avenue. Carly Coswick, who had just recently moved here to Fargo, was in one of those vehicles. She was alone in the vehicle. She was driving. The other vehicle had multiple occupants. Fargo Fire was the first on the scene in response to the call that went out. They arrived on the scene at 2:48 p.m. A minute later, Fargo police arrived at 2:49 p.m. That was officers Andrew Dotis and Tyler Hawes. Minutes later, and when I'm referencing these matters, we have an array of videotape from the public, from private sources, and from law enforcement. I'll cobble those together. It was minutes later that Mohammed Barakat first appeared in the video. He was driving northbound on 25th. He had not yet gotten to the 9th Avenue crossroad when he came into the Big Top Bingo video feed. So he's south of the crash. The crash would have been off to his left and just a little bit north. He took that left turn onto 9th Avenue and then immediately took a right turn into the parking lot that was just adjacent to 25th and where the crash was. So he pulled immediately into that parking lot. At this point, only officers Hawes and Dotis are at the scene, along with the fire crew that got there first. So we have the two officers. He pulls in, and he's sitting in his vehicle facing 25th. The distance between him and the crash at that point would be about here to the second row, where I'm standing to the second row. And he sat there for a while observing the scene. The lights are flashing. As you can imagine, we've all seen how many crash scenes. Minutes later, he pulls out of that spot, and he drives back onto 9th Street. Onto 9th Street, but then kind of twists a little bit, goes over to Big Top Bingo, and parks in the parking lot. Again, he spends a short time there, still in full view of the crash. Officer still on scene. After a couple of minutes, he drives out of the north side of that parking lot, takes a right turn, and gets stopped at the light. He's there for several minutes. At that point, the crash is off to his left, 20, 30 feet away. Able to observe the officers at the scene, the Fargo fire at the scene. Barakat continues across 25th and into the trailer park on the other side. Takes the first, I guess you'd say the first block in, he takes a left turn and heads north and goes out of view of the video feed from Big Top Bingo. He's out of view for several minutes. And then you see him emerge again. Now in the alley that is to the west of the parking lot where he parked in the first instance. I'm going to put up a picture. If I can first, put up image number 1. This is Mohammed Barakat. You'll forgive the lack of resolution. It's from a video. It's the best we could do at this time. I'm working on other photos, and we'll have a request at the end of our proceedings today. Could you please go to item number 2? I'm just going to get you oriented on this. Bear with me, but I think it helps to have a picture in your mind. This is the overhead shot. Is this not going to work on there? No, it works in my hand. Doesn't work on there. Okay, well, I'll point at it. You see where the police cars are down here. That's where the crash, this is later on, everything's cleared. This is not during this incident, but this is where the crash took place out on 25th. That's the parking lot. Just on the top of that is the parking lot where Barakat was parked. Actually, that's still his vehicle. The furthest one to the right is still his vehicle. This is sometime after. Then there's that building. It's a private businesses there. Big Top Bingo is off to the left. The trailer park that I mentioned would be in the foreground on this side. So you've got south, north to the right, west, and east. Okay, so when I mentioned now he's in the alley after reemerging, getting back on the video, he's in the alley right behind that building. And we see him come back into frame, and he proceeds south on that alley, goes around the side of that building, and again parks right there where he's in full view of the crash scene and the officer's activity. At 3:03, now remember those other times, at 3:03 p.m., Officers Robinson and Jake Wallin show up at the scene. They are now the third and fourth officers to respond to the scene, and they show up while the defendant, who's now been casing this out for all those minutes, driving at it and coming at it from different angles, now he's sitting there watching, waiting for additional law enforcement, and they came. Now you got a total of 4 Fargo police officers out there as of 3:03 p.m. At almost that exact time, one of the vehicles, and again, bear with me, I'm not going through this because we're all working on traffic reconstruction here. These will all be relevant points. At some point, right there, almost immediately after those 2 officers arrived, one of the crash vehicles drives up. You're going to start clearing the road. It drives forward, 20, 30 feet to 9th, takes a right, goes around, and comes right into the parking lot. And it is parked on our image here to the left of it's the middle of the 3 cars there, Forget about the one on the left, far left. It's the middle of the three cars there. That's the vehicle that was run into. That was the furthest south vehicle that was run into and had multiple occupants in it. They parked their vehicle right there next to Barakat, who's still in his vehicle in the driver's seat, looking out. Incidentally, he has spray painted all the windows in the back of his vehicle. Nobody can see into it. From a distance, it would look tinted. Standing next to it, you'd realize there's something else going on here. I can't see in there at all. But nobody noticed anything out of the ordinary, and they wouldn't have any cause to. The police are handling their site, and the defendant's just laying in wait inside that vehicle. The individuals in the crash vehicle, they get out. Now, they want to look at the damage to their vehicle. Get out. They've got their cell phones out. They're taking pictures, I suppose making calls and talking behind there, waiting for police to come over and talk to them. Carly is on the sidewalk. She's on the sidewalk almost directly in front of where the defendant's vehicle is facing. She's down on the sidewalk. Her vehicle remains out in the street. That's important in a moment too. At this point, and I'll get in a minute, we're not talking about much time having gone by here. A lot of activity, but not a lot of time has gone by. At this point, 3 Fargo police officers make their way up from the street, up into that lot, and start walking toward the crash vehicle to talk with those individuals. But remember, that will then require they'll have to walk past Barakat's vehicle, and he's sitting in there. The windows are open. The back is, you can't see into the back. He's sitting there. And when they first start walking, I'm, again, estimating 30, 40 feet away. They can't see into there and see that lying next to him on the seat is the double magazined .223 long rifle. That's Police Officer Jake Wallin, Police Officer Andrew Otis, and Police Officer Tyler Hawes. Officer Robinson remains in the street. He remained in the street because the fire truck was going to be pulled away and going to be leaving, and his concern was there'd be too much space that was open there, and he was worried that someone would come along, go into the turn lane, and maybe we'd have another accident. So he walked around. He was on the other side of Carly's car, just waiting for what was going to come next, and he's going to go back and move his police vehicle up. But as officers Wallin, Otis, and Hawes started to make their way to talk to those other people, they're getting closer and closer to Barakat's vehicle with the open window. We're not releasing today the body cam videos. We will be in the fullness of time. When the time is appropriate. As they approach, best estimate I'm going to be able to give you 10, 15 feet away. Barakat takes out his long rifle. It's scoped. It's got a double mag. He's loaded. He's got 60 rounds available to him. And what that is they're side by side. You use one up, and all you have to do is push the other one over, and you've got the access to the other 30. That becomes a relevant point also, beside the obvious. He opens fire. Barakat opens fire on the officers, and as Officer Robinson described to my BCI agent when telling about, giving his account of what had happened, and as verified by listening to the audio, it is, he believed it to be, and reasonably so, automatic fire. It is rapid, rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat, all made possible because of what is known as a binary trigger. Thank you. That's right. All possible because of what's known as a binary trigger. Aftermarket, legal, purposeless. Pull around, let go around. Pull around, let go around. Everything you hit, you'll hit twice because you got the binary trigger. That's relevant for obvious. It appears that Fargo police officer Jake Wallin is the first struck. But it happened so rapidly, there's no way to really know which of them, and I don't know that it matters. But he was about a foot and a half ahead, step and a half ahead of the other two officers. But in rapid succession, Dotis and Hawes are hit. All of them are hit. None of the officers even has so much as an opportunity to turn, to crouch, to grab for their service weapon, nothing. It's that rapid. They drop, drop, drop. Each of the officers, terms later, stumbled, willed their way a little ways. In the wake of the shooting. Now, there's no pause in anything that I'm describing to you. I'm just trying the best that I can. Rapidly run around to the other side of the vehicle and do the only thing they can do. They're crouching for their lives. They're crouching for their lives over behind the vehicle that they've just been in this accident with. Officer Robinson, who's out on the other side of that vehicle, God bless him, I'll tell you. One of the things he asks our investigator later, did I remember to call it in? Yeah. Calm. Calling it in. Shots fired, knowing he's the last officer. He didn't call that in. There's no knowing what happens next. I mean, if he doesn't get that called in before something happens to him is what I'm saying. Calls it in, stands up, and immediately engages. Having no idea, especially in light of all the rapid fire. He has no idea how many weapons he's facing. No idea. No idea. About 1.5 times, I would say, between myself and Mike McFeely, about 1.5 times that distance, back here in the purple shirt, he's engaging a guy with a long rifle, scoped, sitting in his car, still sitting in the car, and the officer is away from his vehicle. He's got his service weapon, and he engages. Barakat is not hit in that barrage from the officer, and he wouldn't be. There's not much space there, and he's inside of his vehicle. Barakat jumps out of the vehicle, opens the door, and runs around the back of his vehicle, positions himself on the passenger side, and has a direct line at the officer, who's that distance I just described. We think it's about 75 feet. Barakat, with his scoped weapons, got a direct line. Officer Robinson is obstructed by the crash vehicle, maybe to his waist, and he's firing direct on. At some point, again, this is all instantaneous. Carly does what any of us would do. She tries to take cover. She was on the sidewalk, remember. She runs to try to get behind a tree. It ain't much of a tree, but it's something. She makes it a couple of steps. The defendant sees her moving, so intent is he with his murderous resolve. He sees her moving. He goes off of the officer and comes over and shoots her. Again, striking his victim with multiple rounds. She's down immediately, severely injured. In that instant, when he turned mildly profile, Officer Robinson, and he says, when he's talking to the BCI agents days later, he tells them, he knew he'd popped off several rounds when Barakat was in the car. Now he's got him around. He knows he's standing up. He sees what's happened. He knows he's got officers down. He knows he's got the civilian down. knows he's got other civilians just off the side, and he tells himself, just squeeze. Careful, careful, squeeze. And he does. He hits the long rifle and incapacitates it. I don't think he'll tell you he was aiming for the long rifle. He's aiming for center mass, but he hits the long rifle. It's incapacitated, and he also hits Barakat. But Barakat's far from done. He takes the round, and he goes down. Now, Robinson comes from around the vehicle and is closing. At great peril to himself. Again, remember, he has no way to know if there are other gunmen, and this one's still moving. 16 times between there and the end of this whole, 16 times he directs the defendant to raise his hands, and the defendant does at one point with a 9mm in his hand that he's trying desperately to charge. Get a round in the chamber. Drop the gun, drop the gun. He doesn't drop the gun. Officer again fires. Barakat continues to move as the officer moves closer. This is where he calls in. I have 3 shots fired. I have 3 officers down. I have 3 officers down. Send everybody. I don't know if there's a more lonely human being on this planet than Officer Zach Robinson closing in on that scene. He's got 3 officers down. He's got a civilian who's been shot. He's got a guy he's closing in on that he's hoping like hell is the only shooter out here. Officer Robinson continues up through the grass toward Barakat's vehicle. He goes to the driver's side to keep the vehicle between himself and Barakat. Still, no other officers have been able to respond. This has happened so rapidly as they go along. I should have mentioned, and I didn't, it was 2 minutes. 2 minutes from when Officers Wallin and Robinson arrived at the scene. A little under 2 minutes before gunfire erupted. All that was taking place in that period, 2 minutes. Now Robinson is walking around behind the vehicle, coming around to the passenger side back there. Again, he's got the civilians hiding behind the car just off to the, what would be the south there. And one last time, one final time, showing the restraint that I can't imagine God giving anyone under these circumstances. He says, again, drop your gun. He comes out from behind the vehicle. The defendant still has the gun in his hand. He's lying there. And the force used by the officer neutralizes Mohammed Barakat. When you're watching this, from the moment that the shooting starts, and especially in hindsight when you know the weaponry that Barakat had in that vehicle and in his hands. He had 2 handguns on him, including the 9mm I just referenced, and he had the long rifle. It's difficult to overstate how dramatically, especially at that distance, how dramatically outgunned police officer Zach Robinson was. And you're going to have to rely on my recitation for now, but you'll see that body cam video in time, and I know we'll all agree. That man was never outmanned. It was 3:06 and 34 seconds when Officer Robinson finally neutralized the defendant, who remained alive but in significant distress. Robinson remaining composed. Another officer, Officer Clower, is now at the scene. Again, these moments have passed. He must have been close by. He's now on the scene. He came right to Robinson's side. Robinson directs that he cuff him, which you got to do because he's still moving. They cuff him. And Officer Robinson immediately makes his way to his fallen brother officers and to the area where they are being treated along with Carly. And eventually they're all being treated by Fargo Fire, Fargo Police who are on the scene, and each of them surrounded by a blue wall, man. People around them literally encouraging them to live. Stay with us. Stay with us, Andrew. Saying his name, squeezing his hand, massaging his shoulders, doing everything they can. Robinson's right there too. All the fire and rescue people. All the Fargo police responding to this scene. All the law enforcement. Not intentionally leaving anyone else out. You'll understand, we didn't have these reports yet. I've got all the information. We've been in all these meetings, but not intentionally leaving anyone out. It would be horrific enough if this were the end. If that was all we knew, and that was the end of these horrible events in the wake of the fender bender on 25th Street South. Officer Robinson and the others, it would be heroic enough if we only knew that he had so courageously stood our enemy down. But as the investigation in the ensuing week has made clear, the thin blue line was severely, severely tested. Fargo police officer Zach Robinson was indeed the last man standing in that blue line at that moment. What he was standing between was not just the horrible events that were unfolding there, but between the horrible events that Mohammed Barakat had planned, had envisioned, planned, and intended, and armed himself for beyond fully that day. In the wake of these events, law enforcement was moving rapidly, and I thank all of our law enforcement partners. We had tremendous help from the North Dakota Highway Patrol, the Sheriff's Office, the other police departments, the FBI, federal law enforcement. My friend Max Schneider, our U.S. Attorney, is here today, and he's going to be talking a little bit too. Search warrants. We quickly ascertained what his residence was. We had to get into the vehicle. Law enforcement got eyes on the vehicle, realized when they look in the back, they got a situation on our hands. The bomb squad was called in at one point, and the bomb sniffing dog hit on the vehicle, as it later hit on his private residence in South Fargo. I'll get in a moment to some of the items seized in the vehicle, but I wanted to say that the search warrant was attained in federal court later that night, and the search itself took place in the late night, morning hours the next day. First, the vehicle. If you could put up photo number 3, please. This is Barakat's vehicle. See, position exactly where it was, unmoved from the events I just described. There in the back seat, you can see one of the firearms down on the ground, I think it is. And then there are containers. There were 3 largish gas containers, actually only 2 of them were gasoline containers. The third was another container, but they all had gasoline, all filled with gasoline. They find in the vehicle 2 innocuous-looking propane tanks you might have for your Weber grill. But what they discovered was that they were filled, one completed at the top, the other one halfway up, with explosive materials concocted at home, purchased lawfully, compiled in his home. 2 of those in this vehicle. Switch to photo number 4, please, quickly. Yeah, just real quick. There's those items. Simple looking canisters for the gasoline, and then the 2 propane tanks as well. Item number 5 we showed you the other day. We'll show you that quickly. This was a self-styled hand grenade. Works, by the way. Fuse lighted. That was in the vehicle as well. And then go to item number 6. These are the items seized from the vehicle at the scene of these atrocities. Number of weapons. A .380 semi-automatic handgun, remained in the vehicle during this event. 9mm handgun, utilized as I described. I don't have a better way to describe this. An AK-styled rifle, not used in this event. Well, used, right? I mean, it's in the vehicle, though. And then the 223-round weapon used by Barkat to kill Officer Wallin and injure the others. Also at the scene, 40 caliber handgun. That was on the defendant as well, in addition to the 9mm that he was brandishing. And then there was another 9mm in the vehicle. So you got a total of 4 handguns, all semi-automatics, and 2 semi-automatic long rifles. Sorry, 3 semi-automatic long rifles, 1 and only 1, and the one he picked with a binary trigger. Search warrant conducted at the residence in the aftermath. A variety of items. The FBI was kind enough to carry out those. Kind was just a bad choice of words, Mac. I didn't. We appreciate it very much. The FBI sat on the residence, waited for the search warrant to come through. Mac and his team were working on it that night, got it signed by a federal judge, and they went in for the search the next day. A 12-gauge shotgun, another 12-gauge shotgun, a 22 caliber handgun, a Remington Model 700 deer rifle. That's going to sound familiar to a lot of us in the room. A very standard deer rifle weapon. Another 223 rounded rifle, and a 9mm handgun. An array of live ammunition on the premises strewn about. A number of trail cameras inside his residence. And there's maybe also in his storage garage or the garage along with the unit, but there were a number of these trail cams. Several phones and 1 computer and a variety of grenade parts. Those items are all seized, obviously, in relation to this investigation. In the next days, the forensics investigator experts with the BCI, I see some legislators here in the room, you just approved 4 more of these. This is why. They are expert, but there are only so many of them. And thankfully, we had the folks to just get right on this. They worked around the clock on these computers, understanding that we may have a situation where there are other proximate dangers that we need to address immediately. I cannot thank them enough for their tireless work. Tireless isn't the right word. I'm sure they were tired, but they weren't sleeping, and they were getting through this on all of your behalf. Figured out a long, interesting, not a social media presence, not a lot of interaction or people with whom he would interact. We are continuing down every lead that we have from these phones and from the electronics and community contacting other people with knowledge about him. The fact that we're having this gathering with you today and then one a couple days ago, in part, should reassure you that we don't at this moment see additional threat emanating out of this incident. At this moment, if that were to change, you will know. We will let you know. That's our obligation, and that's what we'll do, of course. Numbers of searches. Interesting topics. Explosive ammo, kill fast, incendiary rounds, mass shooting events. How to, I guess. Going through all mass shooting events around the country, picking up what he could from reading about other events that have taken place. We've all heard copycats, no word unknown to law enforcement. Mass shooting events. Chillingly, area events. Area events where there are crowds in the Fargo-Moorhead area, Cass County area, all around. Singled out a few as he went along. And on the last search, on the last night at 10:30 7:30 p.m. on July 13th, quote, "Thousands enjoy first day of downtown Fargo street fair." There have been inquiries about the why. What's the motive? I've been in and out of law enforcement for 30 years. You might be surprised to know how many times you finish up and you're still scratching your head. You're still scratching your head. Motive, obvious motive to kill. I mean, driven by hate, driven by wanting to kill, not particularized to some group that we can discern at this moment. Not particularized to one individual that we can see. The horrible winds of fate is the best explanation I have for you for how he saw those officers on the way to where we believe he was going. And his pattern of when he got there, just casing it out and driving around, sitting for several minutes and sizing it up, maybe he knew there'll be more law enforcement showing up. And he guessed right. But he was very patient, going around, looking at it from all sides, just waiting. There would be no way that he would have known that event couldn't have, obviously. It's a fender bender in South Fargo. And he's just proceeding. He'd come a long ways up 25th. Horrible, horrible winds of fate. In an instance like this, I'm not a mental health professional, and I'm not gonna pretend to be one. But officers who lived through something like this, who maybe they responded as fast as they could and they couldn't get there fast enough. Others. The officers on the scene who were ambushed so completely, they had no ability, no moment, no instant to even reach for their weapons. Wondering, what else could I have done? Should I check that? What else should I have done? They did all. They did all. We've described Officer Robinson's heroics. But every man and woman, you all know this, everyone who raises their hand and they take that oath and they don that uniform and they carry that badge knows that this can and does happen all across this country, routinely. And here too, we're not unknown to this. Every one of them. I know I think they're feeling this from all of you, from the community, recognition, whatever their role on that day, you were part of the line. You stood between these murderous intentions and acts. One officer remaining. He goes down, 5, 6 blocks to downtown Fargo. The heroics that it took to preserve the lives of Carly, of Andrew, of Tyler. There wouldn't have been enough emergency personnel within a 3-state area to meet the needs. This is a painful week for law enforcement. It's also a reminder of the heroism of law enforcement. And if I could say on their behalf, because I've heard it from them in the last week too, it's also a reminder of how good you are. I've thought it many times in my life and career. The public doesn't get enough credit. You're good. You care. They see it. They feel it. I want to thank you on their behalf for that. There's going to be some other comments here, and we'll look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney General Wrigley. My name is Max Schneider. I'm the United States Attorney for the District of North Dakota. And on behalf of the Department of Justice, I want to express my sincerest condolences to the officers, their families, and the Fargo Police Department in the wake of this senseless violence. And I also want to share our deep gratitude for the heroism of the 4 officers and the courage and selflessness shown by Officer Zachary Robinson, whose grace under unimaginable pressure averted further tragedy, as the Attorney General described. I want to speak today, to the extent that I'm able, about the efforts of Fargo or federal law enforcement undertaken since last Friday. And I also want to touch on the efforts still to come. Let me first say that there is no daylight between federal law enforcement and our state partners when it comes to responding to this terrible crime. I've been in regular contact with Attorney General Wrigley since last Friday, and in that time, we have seen absolutely seamless coordination between the FBI, the ATF, and our state partners at BCI. They are true professionals and the best partners in the truest sense of the word. Last Friday, ATF agents from the Fargo field office responded to the officer-involved shooting within minutes of the incident. As has been discussed today and earlier this week, as shown on the screen, the deceased suspect was in the possession of an absolute arsenal of weapons and explosives that were with him at the scene at the time of the shooting. ATF has since conducted crime gun intelligence queries and analysis, interviews, and provided technical resources towards this investigation. And ATF continues to work closely within its areas of expertise with the FBI, BCI, Fargo Police Department, and other investigators. They're working to determine the motives of the deceased suspect, as well as to identify any co-conspirators. Likewise, the FBI's Minneapolis field office swiftly responded to the scene last Friday. They provided immediate assistance to the Fargo Police Department and to BCI. The scene was thoroughly assessed by the FBI, and responsibilities for the ongoing investigation were divided amongst the agencies on the scene based on their areas of respective expertise. As the investigation progressed, it became evident that the judicial process would be necessary to gather further evidence. Therefore, within hours of the shooting, the United States Attorney's Office, working with the FBI, obtained a federal search warrant for the deceased suspect's home. Pursuant to that warrant, the FBI began a search of the home alongside our partners at BCI, which also continued to investigate at the scene. As the Attorney General mentioned, FBI agents tirelessly searched the suspect's home through the early morning hours and into the day on Saturday. And while searching the residence, FBI agents came across a significant amount of evidence, as you've heard discussed today. That included the electronic devices that were described by the Attorney General. These electronic devices were lawfully seized and shared with BCI for the purpose of conducting an examination. Those devices and the other items recovered for evidentiary purposes are currently undergoing meticulous examination and evaluation. As our investigation continues, the FBI remains fully committed to working closely with our local, state, and federal partners. It's understandable and completely justified to want to know why. Why did this senseless violence happen? What could possibly motivate someone to ambush young officers in the line of duty? How could murderous chaos and this type of evil arise on a familiar street in Fargo, North Dakota? A week after this horrible tragedy, federal law enforcement agents are working around the clock with their state counterparts at BCI to find answers. And as that investigation continues, I want to be clear about three things. Number one, after an aggressive review of the evidence thus far, we have no reason to believe the public is in further danger. Number two, even at this early stage of the investigation, if there was clear evidence of motive, we would share it. And number three, when this investigation has been concluded and no stone is left unturned, we will update the public as we are able. That will either be at a briefing like this one, or it will be through our filings in court. In the meantime, federal law enforcement will continue to work closely with our partners at BCI on this important investigation. And we'll continue to hold the officers, their families, and the Fargo PD close in our hearts.
Thank you, sir. And thanks to all of our partners up here have been tremendous. We have worked seamlessly with all of them and our community. We're very appreciative for those efforts. I want to provide a little bit of happy news to you in terms of Officer Dotis and Hawes. Yesterday, they were both able to stand up out of their beds briefly, which is miraculously very good news and a blessing for all of us. Very happy about that. They continue to have a significant road to recovery, not insurmountable, but we need those continued thoughts and prayers for them and their families who have gone through tremendous horror here in the last week. So I wanted to let everyone know about that, and as soon as they are in a position, we're excited to get them back with the rest of the team and the family and go from there. So that's a little bit of good news in all of the chaos that we've had to deal with. The other thing I'd like to reiterate, in knowing a little more about this now and listening to the Attorney General, it was clear that this individual was a calculated, insidious, murderous individual, dead set on hurting, killing as many people as possible. He had the intent, he had the commitment, he had the means. But for the intervention of our courageous and brave Fargo PD personnel. Zach Robinson, obviously without doubt, courageous, the last man there to prevent war from happening. But all of our officers, Jake Willeen, likely the first person hit. That would seem to me to make a lot of sense based on his fatal injury. He took that bullet that someone else in our community might have otherwise taken. Andrew Dotis, Tyler Hawes, took other bullets that other people in our community would have otherwise likely taken. And so I don't want it lost on anyone that all of these folks, including our firefighters who were out there in a very dangerous situation, did the very best they could to keep all of us safe. There's a lot of concern, legitimate concern, about other threats and danger to the community. We agree. We're concerned as well. We've been meeting here with the mayor and others in evaluating our special events to see if there's other things that we can add for safety. And so you may see more visible signs to help prevent as much as we can. And there have always been and will continue to be other things that you don't see, but rest assured that our personnel are out there in many ways, both physically and from an intelligence platform, working with our state and federal, local partners to make sure that we're doing everything we can to prevent harm to our community and allowing you to go out and enjoy a beautiful city, entertainment, spend time with your family without fear of that type of activity occurring. But the reality also is there's evil in the world. This guy was one of them. He's an evil individual. And the only thing that stops evil are likely two things: an engaged, supportive community, which we have, their ability to communicate and let us know about things that they know or see. And we've seen this across the country as well, where some of these types of mass events have been upended by the good work of community members, sometimes family members, which can be very difficult. When the person is a member of your family, but you're seeing this and you know this isn't right and bad things might happen, we encourage that interaction. The only other option is the courageous intervention of our law enforcement personnel. And that's what happened on July 14th, and we should never forget that. We avoided, I think, a major catastrophe here in our city. And it's still a very big tragedy, the loss of Officer Willeen, Officers Dotis and Hawes, who are injured. That's going to be with us for a while. And then the heroic efforts of Officer Robinson as well. So, and think about all the personnel from Fargo PD who responded to this. giving life-saving efforts to their colleagues, right? So tremendous work by the fire department. I just want you to know that we are safe. This is a safe city. But evil's out there. We're doing our best to look for it and prevent it. We appreciate your help in that effort as well. Thank you.
We're good for questions. Just one thing.
Yeah.
For Jake Welling, we're going to have a funeral on Saturday in his hometown area. I just want to remind the public that next Wednesday at 1 o'clock at Shields Arena, we will have a memorial service and would ask the public to honor that. Jake just started for our force, and sometimes it's hard to know all the wonderful things about the young man, but I think if the community can reach out and attend that, that would be tremendous. I appreciate all the GoFunding that people are doing for our officers that are wounded. Tremendous spirit amongst the team that's standing now. We all have a heavy heart, and I think many of us are grieving as this time goes on. But I would appreciate it if the community would turn out at the memorial service and honor the man that gave his life for us. Thank you.
One last thing before we get to questions. I wanted to put this phone number out there. This is, I'm told, the first photograph of Mohammed Barakat that's out publicly. I thought I had seen something in the earliest days of this, but it was internally with some reports. And so this photograph is out. We're going to find something with better resolution. But there could be people out there who might have interesting information. And I would just ask you to not judge for yourself maybe what's interesting. His comings and goings, associations, information you might have. I'd ask you to call the BCI, that information, 701, of course, 328, that's easy to remember, like every state number, but 5500, 328-5500, with any information you might have about whether it's this incident, something that you saw, or the comings and goings, the life and practices of Mohammed Barakat. That would be glad to take your questions. I would be remiss if I didn't pass this along too, and the mayor just mentioned this. In talking with the families of the injured officers, and yesterday I spoke, and with Carly's family, and yesterday I spoke with Jeff and Amy, Officer Wileen's parents. I hope that you know how much they feel the outpouring from everybody. I really hope the community understands that, because their hearts are running over. They have felt very, very supported. And that includes by the members of the Fargo Police Department, and a recognition of the life-giving care of the fire department. Chief, I know how proud you are, with good reason, and everyone else. And I was asked to pass that along, and I'm doing it publicly. The people of this region and these organizations need to be congratulated and thanked, because these families are feeling that love and support. With that, we'll take any questions that we're allowed to handle. We're going to have to make sure you got a microphone on you, because there are people watching remotely, so be patient with us if you could.
Can you share more details on Mohammed Barakat's background, as well as what specifically points to potentially further carnage at the street fair, I believe is the location you mentioned, Drew?
A little bit, not a great amount more about, we know a little bit more, but at this point, what I would share with you is he was a Syrian national. He came to the United States, we're told, I'm informed by our federal partners, came here on an asylum request in 2012. He became a U.S. citizen in 2019, working off and on different odd jobs, all of which, we're pursuing those matters and interviewing people. And that's about what I'm going to say about that. As to his specific intent, the months, actually across years, seems like he lost the will at one point, maybe if there was a pause in there. And then it regained again, where he's looking at the mass casualty events, looking for the impacts of specific types of injuries, looking for particular kinds of firepower that are available and certain kinds of bullets that are available, and then amassing this weaponry at all, and then moving significant amounts of it into his vehicle that day, including the last minutes. We've got video of him going out of his place with a suitcase in which he's got, more weapons, more rounds. So, his intent was pretty evident. As I said, in the days leading up to there, he's looking for specifically to the region for large crowd events in the region. And based on the time and the direction where he was going, he was either likely to be taking a right when he got to Main Avenue, going downtown, taking a left when he got to Main Avenue, and going out to the fairgrounds. Those are the two large events going on at that time. 1,800 rounds of ammunition in the vehicle, multiple weapons, which I just described, a vest. It was not a tactical vest. It wasn't a bulletproof vest, but he had a vest just absolutely stuffed with magazines. And one piece of information we picked up just yesterday, putting the finishing touches on his shooting skills in the last hours before this assault.
This question probably is for Mac. Was Barakat on the radar of federal agents or federal law enforcement at all prior to this?
I'm going to defer to the ongoing investigation on that, Tasha.
Last press conference, there was some talk about him being known, Bearcat being known a little bit to law enforcement to some degree, either local or federal. Can you explain anything more about that?
We know some more. I'm going to relay a little bit more. There were some contacts along the line of he had a fire in his place, cooking fire, I think it was, and there was some contact with the fire department. There was a report that was made some while back. I'm not going to go into the details of it, also because I don't have it. It's called the Guardian Report. It's a federal report of some kind. There was talk of him being on a watch list. Information that we have from our federal partners is he was not on the terrorist watch list, but there was this Guardian Report some years back made by a member, someone who was familiar with him or knew him. I'm not going to say much about it except to say it is not, we are told, about a threat of violence or an act of this nature or anything along these lines. I'm going to leave it at that.
What about any affiliations, religious, anything that you've discovered so far that you can disclose?
If I say to you that I'm not going to discuss that, there's going to be assumptions, right? People are going to say, oh, they think they know something. I would caution people along those lines. Actually, Mac and I talked about this a little bit this morning, and it is fair to say that we've established no ties even to the Muslim community here in the area. We have no ties been established in that regard. And beyond that, I don't have much. At this point, it seems more notable that he's Muslim than that I'm Lutheran. From where we're at with the investigation right now, that's fair. And I think we should put that out there.
Just wondering if you can give an update on the civilian who was shot?
Forgive me,
Can you give an update on the civilian who was shot?
I spoke to Carly's mother a couple of days ago, and I believe that Carly was moved out of the IC unit as well. I called her mom on the way down here today, and I'm waiting for a call back. She was very seriously injured. She's got a medical road up ahead. She's in good spirits, though. I talked to her over the weekend, I think it was Saturday or Sunday, maybe both. She was in relatively good spirits having gone through this. I assured her that she's come to the right kind of community, told her a little bit about what I know about this place that my family's called home our whole lives. Came here and had great plans. I think has great plans, but she's got a hurdle here with her health, and I have every belief that she's going to make her way forward. She's got a little ways before she's going to be able to put some weight on things, but she was very severely injured. That's a high power round, and she's got a ways to go. But great parents. It was good to talk with them, and I know they appreciate the outpouring in this community that didn't even really know her daughter yet.
With Barakat having seemingly no online presence and the fact that he didn't seem very connected in the community, maybe wasn't communicating with people via cell phone much. What other, are you looking into, or are others looking into some other means of communication he might have been using? And if so, what would those be? Like perhaps the dark web or something to that?
I'll just leave it at the perfectly reasonable question. I'm just going to leave it at yes. I mean, all pursuits are on. I mean, everything that they find when we go into the phones, I mean, those are a roadmap to your life, right? The phone, and get on the computer and see what that presence is. Everybody's got some presence. Everybody's got some footprint. And, you know, you just keep going through financial documents, financial records, anything that you can find. Having spent 10 years as the United States Attorney here in the state and 30 years in and out of law enforcement, you'd be surprised sometimes at how just amazingly resourceful federal, state, local, tribal law enforcement are, and pursuing any and all avenues based on the evidence that they're finding as they go along. When I mentioned the scant presence on social media, I mean, I thought I was the only person in America that never had a Facebook account. He just doesn't have that we can see now. Doesn't mean there never was. No, you never know. We're going back and looking around for others, but we're a week into this, and it continues.
Maybe I missed this, Attorney General, but how far back does the timeline go when he was searching out different methods of mayhem, and how long back does the acquiring of weapons go?
About the weapons, Mike?
How far back, when did he start compiling the weapons? And how far back did the timeline go of searching? How long was he preparing to do something?
Okay. The searches I know go back a few years. Chief Deputy Ness was just looking at it again on the way over here. Do you remember the furthest year back on the searches?
The ones that we had, it was 2018, but that's preliminary.
Okay. Yeah, I think you heard her. Preliminarily, the furthest back that we have is 2018 that we see on those searches. But again, do we find more? I don't know. And as for the firearms, to our knowledge, what we've been informed by our federal partners, they're all purchased lawfully. And I don't know if the U.S. Attorney has information along those lines that you can share for how far that goes back, but we have reason to conclude that it goes back a little ways.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the ATF has not concluded their investigation on that. You can be assured they're looking into whether any component parts of these guns were illegally provided or things of that nature, but it's ongoing, Mike.
And then do we know why he stopped at the incident to harm the police officers? Is there evidence in the search of his computer that he had something against police officers, or what do we know there?
That's a good question. To the first part, we don't know, and I think it was just happenstance. As I said, how could he possibly anyone know that there was a crash on 25th, and he happened to just be proceeding down that way and had been for quite some while. We've got video of him being on 25th quite a ways south. So he just happened upon that. But his intention, we've described where we get to that, and he gets to the scene and he starts casing it out in the way that we described. And forgive me, Mike, I know there's a second part to that. You said a second part to that. Beyond
I said, did he? Is there evidence in his search of a dislike or hatred of police officers?
Still preliminary. We don't yet have anything. There's not like some screed against the police. There's the federal authorities are going through some they need to use some language experts, foreign language experts to go through a couple of items around there. Maybe we'll see something, but nothing online so far, nothing on the phone so far, nothing that we can gather from the community. We've talked to some family members. No, nothing along those lines yet. Not foreclosed at all.
And one more, you said that in the propane tanks there was explosive materials, so was there not propane in them, and were they filled with something else? Sorry, thank you.
Another good question, Mike. Thanks. I didn't mention that in my remarks. Should have. The bomb squad seized those items, and they have detonated those items, and it was quite dramatic. I mean, anyone who's familiar with substances like tannerite, which are ignited by a high-power rifle, this is a full canister full of it. One is full and one is half. They've been detonated. I've reviewed that evidence, the video evidence and everything else of it. Quite dramatic explosions, and of course they disintegrate the metal encasement of the tank. So that was easily detonated explosive device, and he had the means by which to blow it up anytime he wanted to. And so that remains an area, obviously, of interest in tracking down the where, when, why, and the how isn't very complicated, like I said.
What can you tell us about Bearcat's history prior to coming to the U.S. in 2012?
As a state law enforcement official, I don't have access to the information about that, and I don't know that that's something the U.S. Attorney can speak to. I know as having been the U.S. Attorney, I know U.S. Attorneys don't like being spoken for, so I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, and not to sound like a broken record, but that's part of the investigation.
To that point then, has anyone spoken to his family, and are they in the United States? And if you have, did he make any comments to them about these events?
We have spoken with, he has some family in the United States, I'll leave it at that. They do not live in the area. They're outside of the region. They have been spoken to. It doesn't sound like a particularly close communication pattern between them, and no information that I can give to you right now, not because I'm holding it back, just nothing to share along those lines at this point. But those communications will continue as part of the investigation.
Can you say at all, perhaps a message to the Muslim community here? Because there is some concern and worry that just given the name, that there may be some sort of tie. And while a motive is unclear, or you have said it doesn't seem he intended to be tied to any particular group, again, there is some concern.
I don't have the perfect thing to say along those lines, except to caution people about that. I mean, we would be sharing if we had something particularized. I think I made a comment before that probably speaks that better than anything else. At this point in the investigation, I find his Muslim faith no more notable than my Lutheran faith. We have established and been told about and seen no ties between him and the Muslim community here, and saw nothing in the online search to this point. You know, we've all read about people being radicalized, all of those things. And perhaps people can forgive the impulse or whatever, I don't know, the impulse to wonder. But if and when that becomes part of this, that will be shared. But we're sharing with you now what we know and what we've seen. And I stand by my early comment repeated right now.
Question for Drew first, and then Mac. Were there any Muslim or Islamic faith-related materials recovered at the suspect's home?
Recovered from his home?
Yeah, were there any? I mean, is there a Quran? Is there Muslim? You know, it sounds like you're assuming he was of the Muslim faith and saying it's not necessarily related to the crime. And some in the Muslim community are saying just because his name's Muhammad doesn't mean he's Muslim. I'm asking if there's anything that would lead you to believe.
Yeah, and just because someone has a Bible doesn't make them a Christian either. So, but I can answer your question: is that there was a Quran found at his house? But
all right, and then the other question for you is co-conspirators. Some people are surmising with that amount of guns, you can only shoot one gun at a time. So if their plan was to go to a downtown street fair or some other populated event, you couldn't possibly use all those weapons yourself anyway. I mean, is there still a possibility there was a co-conspirator?
There's no way for us to foreclose that there's a co-conspirator. We can tell you that we're out here talking about it a week later because at this point, we don't believe there to be a present concern of others. But our investigation has not foreclosed that, and I don't. I've learned a little bit in 30 years of this. You don't foreclose things that can materialize in an investigation. So that's what we're doing. And as for arming himself to the teeth, as they say, like that. I mean, he had 3 high-power rifles in that vehicle, and he selected the one that gave him the best opportunity to put out the most rounds in the mayhem that he wanted to create and the murderous intent that he had. The other rounds, 1,800 rounds, well, he got through 30 rounds out of that weapon like that. He got through that, actually 40, we think 40, 41 rounds out of that weapon. And that's when it gets incapacitated by Officer Robinson, leaving 20 more in it. He wasn't in a position to get back into that vehicle, but you can put a lot of rounds through one of those weapons in a hurry. So it raises the question, but it doesn't answer the question that there had to be more conspirators because he had more guns. He was a person who had amassed quite an array, and perhaps to give himself more flexibility depending on what it was he was intending on doing, because he was searching a lot of different events. And our belief that day we've already stated. And he selected the weapon in accord with what his intentions were that day, and developed that moment when he saw the police officers cased it out for a while and waited. And in fact, more officers did show up.
Mac, next question for you, actually two-part question. One, Drew mentioned earlier something about a Guardian report. Is there a federal Guardian report that would be like some kind of a list that he would have been on? What is that?
Well, you heard the Attorney General's comment, Scott. I'm going to refrain from commenting further beyond what I've already said earlier. That'll all bear out in time, but for now I'm going to defer to the ongoing investigation.
But you can't tell me whether there's a Guardian report or not?
I think you heard the Attorney General's comment, Scott.
Okay, so there is. Last question then for you, Mac. Are there any plans, or is there even a means to do, an investigation that goes back to his refugee application? I know that there's investigations that are done before these people are accepted for refugee status. Is that information still readily available as far as the investigation?
I'm going to answer that a little bit indirectly. I have full faith that the FBI, working in conjunction with the ATF and our partners at BCI at the state level, are going to conduct a completely thorough investigation. That investigation is going on right now. It's being conducted aggressively and intensely, and we trust them to follow all appropriate leads.
So was this an act of terrorism? Was there some orchestration behind it, beyond the terror that was offered? And my question would pertain to how quickly the federal warrant came. And Mac, I'm curious if the Department of Homeland Security is part of this.
A couple of questions in a row there, Joel. I'll do my best to answer them. With regard to motive, if we had clear evidence of that, we would share it. We would absolutely share it. The state of affairs is that the investigation is ongoing. ATF, FBI, BCI, they will all be looking into the issue of motive. What was the second part of the question? How fast was
Is the Department of Homeland Security involved in your investigation?
I remember that the second question, that was the third one.
Well, the second question is, when you look at this, the federal warrant came right away. That's not always so easy.
Well, it is easy when you have dedicated people like our partners in the FBI and the talented career assistant United States attorneys and support staff in the U.S. Attorney's Office. Okay. We wouldn't think to do otherwise. That was
one more. Did the murderer work out of Hawley, Minnesota? And if he did work out of Hawley, Minnesota, why can't we have a more clear picture? Why can't there be a more picture, or a picture that shows him more clearly if, in fact, Mr. Attorney General, your investigation has shown that, and there was the opportunity, for example, for him to be on a website?
Sorry, my phone's here. In addition to us going through and trying to find a photograph the other day, I got the message from you about the provision that you believed, or some believe, might supersede those DOT provisions, and we looked into that. I'm not sure that we agree. But I do want to get it out, though. I mean, in fact, if we can get it out today, we want to. A higher resolution picture would be better. You can't live in a community like this and not have some people have some familiarity with you. So we're going to do that. And I would, in maybe the next couple of hours, we can to get that out. Mac has an excuse. He works for somebody. I guess I don't. I'm not sure. So we're gonna probably move ahead and be able to get that out. It's something that Mac and I have discussed a bit here in the last days, and absolutely just bear with us for maybe for another couple of hours. We want to get this one out now, but that's what we've got right now. But did he work out of Hawley, Minnesota? I don't have anything for you on that. I don't have anything to say for you on that. We've had some contacts with different businesses that he's worked at over recent years, and those are ongoing discussions, and I just don't want to alert people to that, and that can obstruct an investigation pretty quickly when people start getting other people coming to them, and it can undermine our efforts, so we don't want to do that.
Is there any evidence that points towards Bearcat intentionally creating a diversion?
That's a really good question to say intentionally creating a diversion. It's just such a common technique for people who want to engage in a mass casualty event, which we do think is very well established. We think it's apparent even before we get to the computer, frankly, based on the armaments that he had. Then when you get into the searches, you realize it's a topic of interest to him, and not because he wanted to be a first responder. He was looking at events out there, sizing them up all around. He had interest in researching that all around, not just in the region at all. We haven't had one for him to read. So, but to know it with certainty, like I know the names of my 3 children, no. Pretty common in law enforcement. You can't climb inside their brains, and people don't, write it all down and out. But it's a good question, and I think all evidence points in a direction in that regard, and it's a very common technique. Based on the search from the computer, how he was armed, where he was headed, and he sees this event that tends to distract him and give him an opportunity to do something to begin the process of carrying out what he wanted to ultimately carry out. I said it before, the horrible winds of fate sometimes, but those events fell into place and fell into his path.
Can someone just clarify what exactly, in general, a Guardian report is?
I don't even know. I got to tell you, I literally had never heard the phrase before until last Friday night. It wasn't a phrase with which I was familiar. We're all familiar with the terrorist watch list, and I don't know when they came up with the reporting system that led to Guardian reports. I have literally never heard it referenced in light of an investigation until this instance, and still have not been provided a copy of the Guardian report in this case.
The fact that he has is there anything you wanted to add, Matt? Can you provide any insight now that you're the U.S. Attorney?
I think that's pretty well covered. Essentially, it's a way for the public to engage local law enforcement and notify them about things of concern.
So somebody from the public, could that have been when the fire department responded to the fire at his home, that they would have maybe forwarded some report onto law enforcement that they saw some concerning items?
Yeah, there's a lot of information on our part up here, so I just ask you to not conflate the two. The fire incident had nothing to do with the Guardian report. Totally separate. Totally separate. I maybe answered in the same way because it was at the same time, because I was asked the question by someone, generally law enforcement contacts. And
okay.
I mean, to be clear on all of these, we're answering you the best that we can, both responsibly and then also what we know at this point. Don't come back to me in 2 weeks and say, Drew, you didn't tell us that we had that information. We're taking the step of moving forward here. This is another area Mac and I have been, you talk about no daylight, just seeing recognizing that this is an important thing to do. The public has very understandable concern and love and outpouring, of course, for law enforcement and for Carly, but also about what's being done in response to it. So that's why we're doing this, taking this extraordinary step. But then we've got constraints on what we can share with you.
The fact that you can't find pictures or social media presence, does that just kind of show how far under the radar he's been operating in Fargo? And does that add to this investigation why someone would be like that?
I mean, that speaks to it. I mean, we tell our kids all the time, right? And everyone, once it's out there, and that's right. So it's a little out of the ordinary. There's nothing out there. When I say nothing, but I mean, there's been some things people have provided a video of saying this, they think this is him. Can you verify this is him? I can't verify that that's him. Not because I'm being coy. I look at it and I don't know. We all change with weight gain, weight loss. We don't know on those matters. We may know in a few weeks. We may have some of those answers. Right now, you've got the image that we've got that with the resolution that we've got. To Joel's question, both a day or two ago and now, we're going to try to get that DOT picture out. Who thought, right? I mean, we've all got our driver's license. We're showing it to everybody, and there's all sorts of legal hurdles, and we'll try to move that out too.
And just one last question here. You said it appeared on his internet searches he lost the will. Can you elaborate?
No.
Was he planning something years ago? Or what did you mean by those comments?
No, I just meant that it wasn't a steady stream of like every other day he's going online and finding it. It seemed like he went along the lines of looking, there was a little more intense search period, and then it abated for a while. And then he rejoined the effort to gain knowledge about mass casualty events and so forth. That's all. It's just a reading of the tea leaves that are provided by the search history.
Drew, you and Mac touched a little bit on the forensics. It's kind of a detailed phone question, but was he fairly active in texting and calling this past month? I mean, did he have a lot of contacts that he was in communication with days prior?
I've said pretty much everything I'm going to say about that at this point, other than to just say with the information that we have right now, I would characterize it as not very active.
Okay, and then Mac, you said the forensics being done on writings and language. A lot of people talk about manifestos in cases like this. It doesn't sound like there was one, but is there writing you guys are examining, stuff that he had maybe written online or just emails, what have you?
Yeah, that's all part of the ongoing investigation.
Hi, Peter Teff, JusticeReport.news. You had spoken about a motive. I just was wondering if a possible motive was anti-white hate crimes, if that's being explored as a possible motive. And then also you spoke to the Muslim and the police community in town. Do you have anything to say to the white community who lost 4 last weekend? Thank you.
I don't think the white community lost 4 police officers were assaulted last week. And I don't think law enforcement, anyone that I know, views it that way. 4 officers were out at the scene. 1 was murdered. 2 were grievously injured and put in peril of death. Member of the public, same. I haven't heard anyone until this moment characterize it that way, so I don't have anything to add for that. I'm gonna leave it there.
It was said that he was putting the finishing touches on his shooting skills. Can you say where he was doing this at?
I can, but I won't.
Okay, and then also was said that the bomb dog hit on the apartment. Was this residue or was it actual explosives?
I mentioned the hand grenade parts. Again, that's colloquial. I'm using my words for it. Hand grenade parts, components of hand grenades. You saw the photograph of the one that he had constructed, which was operable, and which he had with him that day, and which was tucked into the vest that he had. As bomb sniffing dogs, they'll hit on gunpowder. There was an array of live rounds in the apartment, so that's what that is. I mean, they're there. They hit on that, and that gives you an additional level of caution, which was then exercised by federal authorities. I had a BCI agent out there also to retrieve the forensics when they got them. They felt it was inevitable they'll find something there, and they did, and I described that. So.
Hi, just to kind of go off of the finishing touches, are you able to tell us if he had any like military training, any formal gun training at all?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add at this point along those lines.
Okay, yeah, and then I know you said he kind of came upon the accident on kind of happenstance. Do you know if he had any sort of police scanner or any other kind of things he'd be able to, I guess, kind of track whereabouts of law enforcement?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good question. It's something we were on the lookout for, and to this point, we've retrieved no detection devices along the line that you described.
What's the gunman's date of birth?
I've got that, just not right in front of me. I believe he's 37 years old. Does anyone have his date of birth? Born in 89. We'll get that to you. Sorry, I don't have that written down up here.
Hi, you said he became a citizen in 2019. Do you know what exact year he came to Fargo and from what city he came from?
We do not have anything along those lines for you.
So my question is a little in regard to the firearms that he possessed. You said he worked kind of odd little jobs here and there for multiple businesses. His collection was rather large. Is this something we think, he was able to amass in a short amount of time, or was this kind of a spread out collection of firearms and ammo, and kind of where do you think those funds came from?
Logical question. It's not one I'm going to address right now. We will eventually. The idea of guns aren't inexpensive, obviously. And the time period within which you purchase them and how many different places you go to, all of that is of interest, of course. And it's being looked into, but it's not something I'm going to share right now.
Just a question rather than an event of opportunity. It became apparent that we heard over the radio commentaries that he was seen on Broadway, maybe looking it over, seeing where there might have been a place of opportunity. Is there any truth to that?
I don't have any information on that, and no information along that line has been made available to me.
Was he, through the investigation, speaking to neighbors at the apartment that he lived in? Was he known to any of them? Any relationship, acquaintanceship with any of them? Did we learn any valuable information from that?
All being evaluated from the very earliest hours of this, and I'm going to leave it at that. I actually that night, things were moving so rapidly. I got a call from a reporter, and I appreciated that, to say there are people here that are talking about this out here, and we had law enforcement on scene, and it's happening rapidly. Appreciated that call. It was the responsible thing to do, for sure. And all of that in the hours and days and continuing on, yes.
There were a number of officers at the street fair in downtown Fargo at around the time the call came through. When the call came through and people started learning what was going on, they went to respond to it, leaving the street fair with a number of privately hired armed security forces. God forbid should something like this ever happen again, would there be plans in place to maybe leave officers at major community events like this when something like this happens?
I don't know if the chief wants to address that today or a different time, but.
Yeah, sure. Good question, Matt. As I said earlier, that is something we're evaluating. Yeah, I think the natural tendency when we've got a situation like this is for, as Zach even said, send everyone, but certainly that's something that we have to look at from a safety perspective as well, and make sure that something like that doesn't happen. But yes, that's being looked at, and go from there.
Okay. And question regarding the shooter, was he, for whomever is able to answer it, was he studying to be an EMT or anything of the sort as part of his plot?
I don't have any information about that. I've not heard that. We continue to look into any and all means of support and expertise that he has, financial and otherwise, and continue to look at that. But I had not heard that. No.
Chief, a couple of years ago, or when you first started, there were a couple of shootings in town, and I said, how do we get a grip on this? And you said, by getting rid of the illegal guns. Today we learned that all these guns are legally obtained. And I'm sure that there's a few people in the cable audience that are watching and saying, that's not an arsenal. I have more in my basement. How do we, were there any kind of red flags that pop up when somebody amasses that many cartridges, that much ammunition? I guess, how do we wrap our heads around this by saying, was there a red flag?
Sure. Well, there are no legal parameters that I'm aware of that are create any alerts when someone buys a certain amount of ammunition or a certain amount of firearms, as long as they're legally purchased. They go through the background check, et cetera. So, yeah, I think that's all I could say on that.
Okay, I apologize if this is kind of the same question because I have an earpiece in my ear, but I was wondering, with the background checks for these purchased weapons, were there any red flags that may have gone unignored, that may have gone ignored by where those guns were purchased?
That's certainly something that is within the jurisdiction of ATF, but which again is continuing to aggressively and thoroughly look into this.
Mr. Wrigley, do you feel that binary triggers should be banned in North Dakota? And if so, would you offer any legislation in the upcoming session to ban those triggers?
Yeah, forgive my naivete on this topic. I learned of this mechanism first time in my life meeting with my BCI agents in the wake of these events last Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I have done a little searching, found no meaningful purpose. I can't find one for it. You can't uninvent the wheel, as they say. It exists. It is purposeless. I may have just made up a word, but you know what I mean? I can't see like what it would do. It's, again, just walking through it. A round is fired, round is fired, round is fired, round is fired. And some of my agents were, commenting to me that if you, if you get pretty good at that and you get the rhythm to that, you've made your weapon into a fully operable machine gun. It's an automatic fire weapon. Now people say, no, it's not. You still have to pull it. And you're like, it's the functional equivalent of it. And we've outlawed that for decades. I don't know. That is a broader discussion down the road. I bring up the topic of it though, because it's at least bears mentioning. And I'll wait for the Twitter assault on that one, but I'll take it. Maybe someone can tell me what they think the purpose is of that. There's no way to undo it. This person chose to employ that tactic. He purchased this and he utilized it. At the end of the day, it's the hate in his heart. It's the drive to kill. It's the desire for mayhem. It's his quest to engage in and carry out a mass casualty event. I'm as speechless as you.
Yeah, last question. Has anyone from the public ever reported Bearcat for being concerns about being a terrorist or any crimes related to that?
I'm not aware of that, but I'm gonna say that I haven't heard anything along those lines. It doesn't mean that has never happened. Nothing's been brought to my attention along those lines. But anything of that nature, of course, is going to be. I don't want you to take from that, say it doesn't exist. We're a week into the investigation. We've had BCI agents, Sheriff's Department, Police Department, every federal agency, neighboring law enforcement, state, local, working on this, but it's a week still in, and we'll see where that goes. The U.S. Attorney mentioned that up ahead, we're going to come back out and share what we continue to see in this. It's a moment of public interest and not just curiosity. It's important interest, and so we'll share that information as we get going up ahead. I have every reason to trust and believe that the federal law enforcement authorities involved in this are being candid with us and forthright about what they know. I don't have a reason to think otherwise, and that's how we're proceeding. I think we're kind of getting to the point here where we'll wrap it up, but if there's a couple more.
Just curious, given his lack of a helmet, a bulletproof vest, other defensive items, did he expect to survive this or not? Just curious what his intent was for his own life or safety.
I have one indication one indication that to me indicates that he did, or that he hoped to. A means by which he would check to see if anyone had been to his apartment in his absence. He had a couple of different techniques that he employed in that regard, and they were employed in this instance. I'm not going to tell you what they are at this point. I might later, will later. Don't say might, I will. Those are the only indicators I have along those lines.
And I'm wondering if what happened here is part of a larger federal investigation. I believe Chief Zabolski said on Saturday he had spoken to Merrick Garland, the FBI director, as well. And I know we have FBI, ATF here. Is Washington, is the focus here, are the feds in Washington, is Homeland Security, any of those agencies directly involved as part of a larger investigation?
I'm going to give it to the chief quickly, but I'm going to answer one part, having been both a federal and state law enforcement official. I can tell you that it's important people remember not every occurrence is there even jurisdiction in the federal side. I had people come to me all the time when I was U.S. Attorney in Macwell too. Some serious thing happened, they'd say, well, that's got to go federal. And you're like, well, there's no jurisdiction for it. I mean, it's specific jurisdiction granted by law. But you don't know that going in. So we appreciate, frankly, Mac and I were on the phone very quickly. I mean, we appreciate that we would be working hand in glove, not knowing where the investigation is going to go. Appreciate that the Attorney General of the United States contacted in too. But that doesn't indicate that there's going to be federal jurisdiction or that they have information that there is. I not to speak for the Attorney General of the United States, but it's a arm out to help, right? To say we want to be there with you, and we'll see where the investigation goes. And then you make those avenue choices, whether you go state or federal. If there is a prosecution in this instance, we are where we are. But Chief, I don't know if you have something to that, but I did want to address that misperception that's out there that people think if it's something really serious, the feds do it, and if it's not, well, I mean, there's not a general homicide provision, for instance. There's not a general homicide provision in federal law. There's one for if you are on a Native American reservation. Major crimes, I could bore you for a long time on this, but no, we see that that was very much an offer to let's assist while we see where this is going, and it's worked. I think the Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney rather, and I would describe it exactly the same way. It's been seamless and working together, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, just to clarify those comments. Attorney General Garland, just as FBI Director Christopher Wray and others have called me specifically to offer condolences and support. And so no discussions relative to investigations. We have no knowledge of any other additional or ongoing federal investigation related to this. And I concur with the Attorney General that we have trust in our federal partners here that we're working with. They need a little more time to work through their investigation, and I think we all kind of await those results.
Mr. Attorney General, one last question. When this has happened all across the nation, law enforcement has referred to these as they are, which is assault weapons, assault rifles. You keep making reference to it as a .223. My .270 that I hunt deer with is a long rifle. Why not refer to these, because they are set up as ARs, the same way law enforcement across the country does, which is as an AR?
I don't know. Honestly, it's like can you hear me okay? It's a term of art to me. I mean, I own an AR. Lots of people own it. It's like the most popular firearm sold in America. I'm not, it goes without saying, I use it it's the smallest caliber you can use for deer hunting. I use mine for deer hunting from time to time. I've never hit a deer with it, interestingly enough. But that's why I'm not trying to be cute about it. I'm referring to it by the caliber. The other one, the other caliber is not as widely known, so I did refer to it as an AK. Same thing, like this wasn't, for instance, an AR. It wasn't an AR-15. It was an AM, I think, 15, one of them that I was looking at. It's like calling every one of these, the channel wrenches, every one of them a crescent wrench. Drives some people crazy. They're not all crescent wrenches. And so that's what they are. We're not making any, show of not letting you know what it is. People can call it what they want. They too often get used for a horrific purpose, but I've been a prosecutor a long time. I also have a Colt 380 semi-automatic that I from time to time will carry, and those get used for a lot of heinous crimes too. That's the only point about it. And I don't hear you making a political point about that. I'm assuring you that I'm not trying to hide the fact of what the weapon that it is. It is an AR style weapon, and then also the other one that we pointed out was an AK style weapon, and I'm comfortable saying that too. It just seemed imprecise otherwise.
This is going to be our last media question.
Kind of a two-parter. The first one, can you at least kind of maybe generalize how he was getting explosives and guns and ammo, whether it was through places of employment, through the mail, purchases at various gun shops across the region? And I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll follow up with a very simple question.
I can't. Not because I won't. We're still looking into those matters. To this point, early on, we believed it to be so. It's remained so now. In one word, legally.
And the investigation, obviously, it appears to be very complex. Any rough timeline, how long it will take to put this full puzzle together? I realize things will pop up, but any idea? Are we talking months or even more than a year?
No, I'm not gonna characterize that. We don't know. Tomorrow we could find out about some connection to somebody in a neighboring state or region or county or apartment building, and our commitment to you is to pursue that to the nth degree, to the end of the earth, whatever we can find, if anything. But I'll caution you, it might be nothing. There are lone wolves. That is a real concept, and what we perceive right now may remain so. It may change as well, but. I don't have any way to do that. Again, referencing back to my 10 years as United States Attorney, I think people thought every time Drew walks out on the steps and announces an indictment or a case or something that's going on, I bet they've been working on this for weeks. Well, try months, years sometimes. There's one case going on. Someone told me the other day, I bet nothing's going to happen, right? Because there's been nobody charged. It's been almost, and then they gave the time period. All I can do is smile at them. It's like these go on. They are painstaking. They go on and on and on. And it's not because federal law enforcement isn't eager to wrap the matters up, but they sometimes involve multiple jurisdictions and on and on and on. If you would watch the work of the BCI, who I've been working with so closely across many, many years, but now the last couple of days, spend so much time down there, I describe them as, it's like an anthill. It's like self-organizing anthill. They're going all over. Everybody's got to-do lists. They get back together. It's incredible. The public, I can feel very good about the fact that your men and women in uniform. I see Jesse John, our sheriff, our great sheriff is here. So many others that are around the room. Hey, these people work hard. And when they come out with the fruits of their investigations, there's a lot to that. There's a lot behind that. You're seeing the tip of the iceberg. So I don't have a meaningful way to give you how long this is going to play out, because we're not going to run out of energy for pursuing every single lead that merits further attention. The time could come where we feel like this has reached its conclusion. We're comfortable that we're at the end of this. We don't have other avenues to go down with regard to this horrible, horrific incident. But we're not there yet. And when we get there, we'll be letting you know that it's run its course, and we're there to share the final thoughts we have on the investigations. Okay, thanks very much. We appreciate it.
Out of objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We welcome everyone.